There's a wide variety of leave available for all civilian employees. Some of them apply in certain situations, but annual leave, sick leave, military leave, leave without pay, court leave, administrative leave are probably the most common. If you happen to be a civilian who PCS'd overseas as a sponsor, you also have the availability of home leave, and there are others as well, but the ones previously mentioned are the most prevalent. I think the supervisor's primary responsibility that begins with this is establishing and communicating the procedures for requesting leave. Employees need to know what the expectations are with respect to that. Is a phone call necessary? Is an email, or these days with technology, is a text acceptable? Can I leave a sticky note on your door and just leave? Well, hopefully we would all realize that that's not acceptable. But it's important for a supervisor to communicate those things. Employees don't inherently know what those types of expectations are as they relate to that. And they vary tremendously from one supervisor to the next. The supervisor is obviously responsible for receiving those requests and making the approvals, or if there are disapprovals, communicating that as well. And so you need to, as part of those procedures, making sure your employees know how they will know whether you have approved or disapproved that request. So don't lose sight of that as well. Supervisor needs to monitor employees' usage and the balances, how much leave is available to their employees, so that when those requests come in, they know what can and can't be approved or what they have available for that use. This is especially important when you have employees that have use or lose annual leave. You need to make sure and not shift the burden entirely to the employee to expect them to schedule it, but to be aware of where they are and making sure that they are given the opportunity to take that leave. Inherent to the leave program itself is making sure that the aspects that you manage are consistent with the legal and regulatory requirements. You've got to ensure compliance with respect to that. So you want to make sure that your actions are consistent with respect to the leave program and the leave procedures. But you also want to make sure that documentation is accurate. Documentation is the key in so many different areas, and not just when you have bad situations, but you need to make sure that all types of leave are properly charged and annotated. And when there's documentation required from the employees, that you receive that and expect to receive that and communicate that to them as well. So there's a number of different responsibilities. Well, to start with the most common, annual leave, it has wide availability for use. It is still subject to supervisory approval, so going back to what the procedures are, to simply allow employees to leave you a note and tell you what they're going to do isn't appropriate. It is still ultimately subject to a supervisor's approval. Part of those procedures should also have something that identifies what should happen when the supervisor is not present or available to make those approvals. But when denial of annual leave occurs, it should only be for mission requirements. It should not be for anything arbitrary or capricious. It should strictly be because the mission requirements prevent the absence. Okay. Sick leave is a type of leave that has changed over the years about its availability. And it has a broad usage for family care that wasn't previously available to us as federal employees. And the definition of family members has expanded tremendously in the very recent past. And so that has created a lot more opportunities for employees to use sick leave. But it is for specific reasons that are related to sickness or health. They can be for medical appointments, but there's a wide range of things that apply, and also for family members. There's also now the availability to use sick leave when you have a serious health condition of a family member. And it's a different family member under the serious health condition provisions than for the regular usage of it. But there are some availabilities that weren't previously there. And not all employees are familiar with those. So supervisors should be aware, or at least know who to consult to make sure when those situations arise that employees get the benefit of those. Sick leave does have, in some cases, a medical documentation requirement. And supervisors should be aware that at the very minimum, when medical documentation is required, what that documentation should include. And that is diagnosis and prognosis. So supervisors can manage lots of different situations by understanding what documentation is required and ensuring that employees are aware as well. And when you get those things, knowing what to look for, and it keeps the program running more efficiently. Leave without pay, there are some requirements in some situations by which a supervisor has to grant leave without pay based on the law, and there are some even by Air Force regulation that leave without pay must be granted. And just a few examples would be from a member of the military Guard or Reserves that is performing active duty service must be granted military leave, or must be granted leave without pay, for their absence related to that. If you have a veteran who has a combat-connected disability and needs time off for treatment of that disability, you must grant leave without pay. So there are some situations, and very specific, that are required by law or regulation. But other than those, leave without pay is largely discretionary. And it simply means that an employee is on an approved absence and is not going to be paid. But it is not a punitive and it is not an adverse situation. Okay? And it is not required that employees exhaust any other paid leave before they can utilize leave without pay. A very key aspect, though, of all leave that we're talking about is that it is requested by the employee and approved by the supervisor. And when that process doesn't occur, when there is no request or approval and an employee is absent, it's important to understand that AWOL, absent without leave, is appropriately charged by a supervisor and should be appropriately charged. It is simply marking an annotation on the time card and documenting the fact that there was an unauthorized absence. When you have unauthorized absences, it's often a common misperception that we're going to charge leave without pay, but that is really inappropriate. It should be an AWOL charge when that occurs. Make sure those supervisors need to know what their local labor agreement with their union says as it relates to leave. Most labor contracts have specific information about the request for sick leave or annual leave, how to deal with conflicts when you have a number of employees that are projecting their annual leave for the year and everyone wants off at the same holiday. So you need to make sure that if you supervise bargaining union employees, that the supervisor knows what the labor contract says with respect to leave. It's important to recognize that while sick leave has limited usage for situations such as illness and injury, pregnancy, childbirth, medical appointments, and so on and so forth, that usage is still limited. For example, a medical appointment that should take 1 to 2 hours, it would not be appropriate for an employee to take a full day of sick leave. Supervisors need to understand and ask those very simple, basic questions to understand that. Now, an employee's absence for the rest of the day because they don't want to return can be attributed and charged to annual leave if appropriate. But it's important to understand it and follow those limitations that go with the usage of sick leave and not allow it to become excessive.